After 50 years alone, I finally found my birth parents, millionaires. When I met my father, he said coldly, "Don't expect money. We didn't want you then, and we don't want you now." Then my celebrity son walked in and said exactly what they deserved to hear. After 50 years alone, I'm about to tell you something that sounds like a Lifetime movie, except it's my actual life and nobody's getting a happy ending commercial break. My birth parents are millionaires. Found that out 3 months ago when a private investigator I'd been saving up for finally cracked the case that had haunted me for 50 years. Turns out, while I was eating government cheese and wearing hand-me-downs that smelled like other people's lives, my biological father was building a tech empire and my mother was collecting art that cost more than most people's houses. But here's the kicker: when I finally worked up the courage to meet them, expecting maybe some tears, some explanations, maybe even an awkward hug, my father looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't expect money. We didn't want you then, and we don't want you now." I should probably back up and explain how I got to that moment, sitting in a mansion that could house a small village, being told by the man who gave me half my DNA that I was still unwanted goods after 5 decades. The thing about being abandoned is that it follows you everywhere, like a shadow that grows longer as the day gets older. I spent my childhood in foster homes that ranged from indifferent to actively hostile, always carrying this fantasy that somewhere out there, my real parents were looking for me. Maybe they were poor but loving. Maybe they'd been forced to give me up. Maybe they thought about me every day and wondered if I was okay. Reality, as it turns out, has a twisted sense of humor. I hired the Pi, a gruff ex-cop named Martinez who looked like he'd seen every dark corner of human nature, after my adoptive parents died. They'd been good people, don't get me wrong, but they'd never been able to give me the one thing I craved most: answers. Who was I? Where did I come from? Why had I been thrown away like yesterday's newspaper? Martinez found them in 6 weeks. Robert and Catherine Thornton of Beacon Hill, Massachusetts. He'd made his fortune in early internet infrastructure, she'd inherited family money and multiplied it through savvy investments. No other children. Clean records. Pristine reputation. "You sure you want to contact them?" Martinez had asked, sliding the folder across his desk. Sometimes the fantasy is kinder than the truth. I should have listened. The first phone call was clinical. That's the word that keeps coming back to me. Robert Thornton spoke to me like I was a business associate he'd rather not deal with but couldn't quite ignore. Polite but cold, efficient but dismissive. "I understand you believe we're your biological parents," he'd said, and I could practically hear him checking his watch through the phone. "The DNA test confirms it," I'd replied, my voice shakier than I'd wanted it to be. At 50 years old, I was still that scared kid asking for scraps of affection. "Yes, well, these things happen. What exactly do you want?" What did I want? I wanted to know why they'd given me away. I wanted to know if they'd ever thought about me. I wanted to know if there was some part of them that had missed me, even a little. Instead, I said, "I'd like to meet you. Both of you." The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. "Very well. Saturday afternoon. 2 o'clock. Don't bring anyone else." Their house, mansion, really, sat behind iron gates that probably cost more than I'd made in the last 3 years. The driveway curved through perfectly manicured gardens that looked like they'd been arranged by someone who'd never actually touched dirt. Everything was pristine, symmetrical, expensive. A housekeeper answered the door, a thin woman with kind eyes who looked at me with something that might have been pity. She led me through rooms filled with art and antiques, each space looking like a museum where people happened to occasionally sit down. Robert and Catherine were waiting in what I suppose you'd call a sitting room, though it felt more like a courtroom. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a sweater that probably cost more than my car. She was elegant in that untouchable way that money buys: perfect posture, perfect makeup, perfectly cold smile. "So," Robert said without preamble, "you're the baby we gave up. Not our son. Not the child we placed for adoption. The baby we gave up." Like I was a pet they'd returned to the shelter. "I'm David," I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "David Matthews. I was hoping we could talk." Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the kind of accent that comes from expensive boarding schools. "There's really nothing to discuss. We were young, it was a mistake, we handled it appropriately." A mistake. 50 years of wondering, dreaming, hoping, and I was a mistake they'd handled appropriately. "I just wanted to understand," I said. "Why you gave me up. What happened?" Robert's laugh was sharp, humorless. "What happened is that we were 23, unmarried, and had futures to think about. A baby would have complicated things." Would have complicated things. I tried to imagine what my life would have been like if I'd been a complication they decided to handle differently. Would I have grown up in this house? Would I have had their opportunities, their education, their connections? "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked. "Tell you what?" Catherine said. "You weren't supposed to find us. These records were supposed to be sealed." That stung more than it should have. They hadn't just given me away, they'd actively hoped I'd never find them. Look, Robert said, leaning forward slightly, I don't know what you're hoping to get out of this, but let me be clear, don't expect money. We didn't want you then, and we don't want you now. We've built a life, and you're not part of it. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd prepared for rejection, but not for cruelty. Not for this casual dismissal of my entire existence. And that's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Dad? Mom? I'm here for lunch. The voice was familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. I knew that voice. Everyone in America knew that voice. The sitting room door opened, and my son walked in. Not my biological son, my actual son. Marcus. The kid I'd raised from the time he was 7, after his mother died in a car accident and I'd married his stepmother Sarah. The kid who'd grown up calling me dad, who I'd taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball and drive a stick shift. Marcus, who was now 28 and one of the most recognizable faces on television, starring in a hit show that had made him wealthy beyond anything I could have imagined when I was changing his diapers and helping with homework. He stopped dead when he saw me, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that looked like dawning horror. David? He said. What are you doing here? Robert and Catherine looked between us, clearly confused. You know each other? Robert asked. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him putting the pieces together. He knew I'd been looking for my birth parents. We'd talked about it over family dinners, and he'd always been supportive, even offering to help pay for the private investigator. This is my dad, Marcus said slowly. My real dad. The one who raised me. The silence in the room was deafening. Catherine's face had gone pale. Your father? Since I was 7, Marcus said, his voice getting stronger. After my mom died, he married my stepmother and adopted me legally. He's the only father I've ever known. I watched my biological parents' faces as the implications sank in. Their rejected son had raised a celebrity. Their throwaway baby had become the father of someone they'd probably seen on magazine covers. Robert cleared his throat. I see. Well, that's interesting. Interesting? Marcus's voice had gone dangerously quiet. He inherited his temper from his biological mother, but he'd learned how to control it from me. You think it's interesting? Marcus, I said quietly, it's okay. We should go. No. He turned to face Robert and Catherine fully, and I recognized the expression on his face. It was the same look he got when he was about to deliver a particularly cutting line on a show. Let me get this straight. You gave away my dad 50 years ago, and now you're sitting here telling him you still don't want him? Catherine lifted her chin. Our personal family matters are none of your concern. My dad is my concern, Marcus shot back. The man who stayed up all night when I had nightmares about my mom. The man who worked 2 jobs to pay for my acting classes. The man who believed in me when nobody else did. That's my concern. Robert was starting to look uncomfortable. Young man, you don't understand the complexity. I understand plenty, Marcus interrupted. I understand that you threw away the best man I've ever known like he was nothing. I understand that while you were building your fortune, he was building character. And I understand that you just made the biggest mistake of your lives. Marcus, I said again, really, it's okay. He turned to me, and his eyes were blazing. No, Dad, it's not okay. These people need to know exactly what they lost. He turned back to Robert and Catherine, and when he spoke, his voice carried all the authority of someone who was used to commanding attention. My father, he said, emphasizing the word, is worth more than all your money combined. He's honest, loyal, compassionate, and strong. He raised me to be a good man, not a wealthy one. He taught me that character matters more than bank accounts and that family is what you build, not what you're born into. Catherine was gripping her chair arms now, her knuckles white. And you know what the really beautiful part is? Marcus continued. You could have been part of something amazing. You could have had a son who would have loved you unconditionally. Instead, you chose money over family, reputation over relationships. You chose to be empty. Now see here, Robert started. I'm not finished, Marcus said, and his voice carried enough steel to cut glass. You want to know about complicated? Let me tell you what's complicated. Complicated is explaining to a 7-year-old why his mother isn't coming home. Complicated is working double shifts and still making time for school plays. Complicated is loving someone else's child like they're your own blood. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? The room was dead silent except for the sound of Catherine's rapid breathing. You said you didn't want him then, and you don't want him now, Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Well, congratulations. You got your wish. But just so we're clear, he doesn't need you. He never did. He built a family without you, raised a son who loves him, and made a life worth living. You're the ones who lost out. He walked over to where I was sitting and put his hand on my shoulder. Come on, Dad. Let's go home. We didn't speak until we were back in my car, away from the mansion and the iron gates and the perfectly manicured life I'd never been allowed to be part of. Marcus had followed me in his own car, but now he was sitting in my passenger seat, both of us staring at the steering wheel. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "For what?" "For dragging you into that. For making you see that." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what the funny part is? I was actually nervous about meeting them. I thought maybe they'd be these wonderful people who'd made a terrible mistake, and I'd have to share you. And now? Now I just feel sorry for them." He turned to look at me. "Dad, they have no idea what they missed. Literally no clue." I felt my throat tighten. I just wanted to know why. Why wasn't I worth keeping? "Hey." Marcus's voice was firm. "Look at me." I did. "You were worth keeping." Sarah saw it. I saw it. Everyone who matters saw it. Those people back there? They're strangers. They might have contributed some DNA, but they're not your family. He was right, of course. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things entirely. Besides, Marcus continued, and now there was a hint of his old humor in his voice, "Wait until I tell Sarah about this. She's going to want to go back there and give them a piece of her mind." I groaned. My wife was 5 feet nothing and weighed maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, but she had the protective instincts of a grizzly bear. "Please don't tell her where they live." I make no promises. That night, sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had done homework, where we'd had family meetings, where we'd celebrated his first role and mourned his biological mother's birthday every year, I found myself thinking about choices. Robert and Catherine had chosen money over family, reputation over relationships, safety over love. They'd chosen to protect themselves rather than fight for something messier and more complicated and infinitely more rewarding. I'd made different choices. When Marcus's mother died, I could have walked away. I was under no obligation to raise another man's child. But I'd looked at this scared, grieving 7-year-old and chosen love over convenience, family over ease, messy and complicated over safe and simple. "You're brooding," Sarah said, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. "I'm processing." "Same thing." She sat down across from me, her eyes soft with concern. "Marcus told me what happened." "I bet he did. He said you were amazing. Calm and dignified even when they were being cruel." I snorted. I felt like that 7-year-old kid again, hoping someone would want me. "But you're not that kid," Sarah said gently. "You're a man who's loved and respected and needed. You're a father and a husband and a friend. You're someone people can count on. I know that, intellectually. But you don't feel it yet." "I feel empty. Like there's this hole that I thought finding them might fill, and instead it just got bigger." Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. "Honey, some holes can't be filled by the people who created them. Some holes can only be filled by the people who choose to love you." 3 days later, Marcus called me at work. I could hear excitement in his voice, which usually meant either very good news or very bad news. "Dad, you need to see the news." "Why? What happened?" "Just turn it on. Channel 7. I found a television and switched to the local news. The anchor was talking about a charity drive, something about providing support for aging out foster kids. And there, being interviewed on the steps of what looked like a community center, was Marcus. The David Matthews Foundation, he was saying to the reporter, will provide housing assistance, education support, and job training for young adults who've aged out of the foster care system. Too many of these kids end up homeless or struggling simply because they never had the family support that most of us take for granted. The reporter asked him about the name of the foundation. Marcus's smile was radiant. "It's named after my father, who taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. It's about the people who show up, day after day, and choose to love you no matter what." He was a foster kid himself, and he knows firsthand what it's like to feel unwanted. This foundation is about making sure no kid ever has to feel that way again. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring slightly. "The initial funding," Marcus continued, "comes from my own earnings, but we're hoping to attract other donors who understand that these kids aren't just statistics, they're someone's potential family members, if we just give them the chance to succeed." The segment ended, and I just stood there in the break room, surrounded by vending machines and motivational posters, crying like an idiot. My phone rang. "Did you see it?" Marcus asked. "I saw it. The foundation is real, Dad. I've been working on it for months, ever since you started looking for them. I wanted to surprise you, but after yesterday, well, it felt like the right time to announce it. Marcus, there's more. I've been talking to some people, and we want you to run it. Full salary, full benefits, the works. You'd be helping kids who were just like you, showing them that being unwanted by some people doesn't mean you're unwanted by everyone." I couldn't speak. "Dad? You there?" "I'm here. Are you sure?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You know what these kids need because you've been where they are. And you know how to love people back to life because you did it for me. The David Matthews Foundation opened its doors 6 months later. Our first facility was a converted apartment complex that could house 20 young adults transitioning out of foster care. We provided not just housing, but job training, college prep, emotional support, and something most of them had never had, a sense that someone believed in them. Robert and Catherine Thornton never contacted me again, which was exactly what I'd expected. But about a year after the foundation opened, we received an anonymous donation of $50,000. The return address was a P.O. box in Massachusetts, and there was no note, no explanation, just a cashier's check made out to the foundation. I never found out for certain if it was from them, but Marcus had a theory. Guilt, he said when I showed him the check. They saw the news coverage, realized what kind of man they'd rejected, and now they're trying to buy their way out of feeling terrible about themselves. If it was them. It was them. And you know what? Let them feel guilty. They should. I deposited the check, because the money would help kids who needed it, but I never acknowledged the donation. If it was Robert and Catherine trying to ease their consciences, they'd have to live with the uncertainty of whether their gesture had even been noticed. 2 years after opening, the foundation had expanded to 3 locations and helped over 100 young adults find their footing in the world. I loved the work in a way I'd never loved anything else, maybe because I knew, deep in my bones, exactly what these kids were feeling. One morning, I was in my office reviewing applications when my assistant knocked on the door. "David? There's someone here to see you. Says it's personal." I looked up to see a young man standing in the doorway, maybe 19 or 20, tall and thin with nervous energy radiating off him like heat. "Mr. Matthews? I'm Jake. Jake Sullivan. I was wondering if I could talk to you." "Of course. Come in, sit down." He perched on the edge of the chair across from my desk, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "I've been living in one of your facilities for about 8 months now. The one on Pine Street." I nodded. I knew Jake, quiet kid, worked nights at a grocery store while taking community college classes during the day. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for the apartment or the job training or any of that. For making me feel like I mattered." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "You do matter, Jake. I know that now. But I didn't before. I aged out of the system when I was 18, and for the first time in my life, nobody was responsible for me. Nobody had to care if I ate or had a place to sleep or if I just disappeared. It was terrifying." I remembered that feeling. The sudden, overwhelming sense of being utterly alone in the world. "But this place," Jake continued, "it's different. The staff actually knows our names. They ask about our classes, our jobs, our goals. They act like our success matters to them." "It does. I know. And that's what I wanted to tell you. You didn't just give us housing, you gave us hope. You made us believe that someone cares whether we make it or not." He stood up, still nervous but more confident now. "I'm graduating next month. Associate's degree in computer programming. I already have a job lined up at a tech company downtown. Good salary, benefits, the whole thing. I'm moving into my own apartment next week." Pride swelled in my chest. "Jake, that's incredible. Congratulations. The thing is," he said, "I'll probably never see you again after I leave here. But I wanted you to know that you saved my life. Not dramatically, I wasn't going to hurt myself or anything like that. But you saved the life I was going to have. You made it possible for me to have a future instead of just surviving." After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about circles. About how being unwanted had led me to Marcus, and Marcus had led me to Sarah, and all of that had led me to this moment, this job, this chance to be the person I'd needed when I was Jake's age. Robert and Catherine had been right about one thing: I was a complication. I was messy and inconvenient and emotionally demanding. But complications, I'd learned, were often where the most beautiful things happened. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 3 years after I'd first walked into that pristine mansion in Beacon Hill. It was Martinez, the private investigator who'd found my birth parents in the first place. "David? You might want to sit down for this." "What's wrong?" "Robert Thornton died last week. Heart attack. His wife found my card in his desk and called me. She wants to see you." I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness for a man I'd barely known, anger at missed opportunities, and something that might have been relief. "Did she say why?" "No, but she sounded different. Smaller somehow. Less cold." The same housekeeper answered the door, but this time her eyes were red-rimmed and her smile was genuine when she saw me. "Mr. Matthews," she said softly. "I'm so glad you came." Catherine was waiting in the same sitting room where she'd dismissed me 3 years earlier, but everything about her had changed. She looked fragile, diminished, like someone had let all the air out of her. Her perfect posture had collapsed, her perfect makeup was absent, and her perfectly cold smile was nowhere to be found. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure you would." I sat down across from her, in the same chair where I'd heard I was unwanted. "I'm sorry for your loss." She nodded, tears threatening to spill over. Robert was. He was a difficult man. Proud. Stubborn. But he wasn't evil. I waited. After you left that day, after your son, Marcus, after what he said, Robert couldn't stop thinking about it. He researched you, you know. Found articles about your foundation, interviews you'd given, stories about the kids you were helping. I didn't know. He was. Impressed isn't the right word. Humbled, maybe. He realized that in trying to protect our perfect life, we'd missed out on knowing someone extraordinary. Catherine reached for a tissue, dabbing at her eyes. He wanted to contact you. Many times. But he was too proud, too ashamed. He kept saying it was too late, that he'd burned that bridge too thoroughly to ever repair it. "It's never too late," I said quietly. "I would have talked to him." "I know. That's what made it worse. He knew you would have been gracious, forgiving, kind. Everything he hadn't been." She stood up and walked to a window overlooking the perfectly manicured garden. "The anonymous donations to your foundation, those were from him. He set up a trust that will continue making donations long after his death. It was his way of trying to not make amends, exactly, but to support the work you were doing." I felt a complex mix of gratitude and sadness. Even in death, Robert couldn't bring himself to make direct contact, but he'd found a way to help. "There's something else," Catherine said, turning back to me. "In his will, he left you something." She handed me an envelope with my name written on it in shaky handwriting. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The photograph was of me as a baby, maybe 3 or 4 months old. I was laughing, reaching for whoever was holding the camera, my eyes bright and happy. Someone had written on the back, "David, 4 months. Such a happy baby." The letter was brief. "David, I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve understanding. I made choices based on fear and selfishness, and those choices cost me the chance to know the remarkable man you became. Your son was right, we lost out. We missed the opportunity to watch you grow, to be proud of your achievements, to support you through your struggles. We chose comfort over courage, and we live with that regret every day. I know it's too late for apologies, but I want you to know that not a day has passed in 50 years that I haven't thought about the baby we gave away. I told myself it was for the best, that you'd be better off without us, but the truth is we were the ones who were diminished by your absence." The photograph is the only one we kept. Catherine wanted to throw it away, but I couldn't. You looked so happy, so full of life and possibility. I hoped, wherever you ended up, that you kept that joy. I hope you can forgive a foolish old man who realized too late what truly matters. Robert. I read the letter twice, tears blurring the words. Catherine was crying openly now, no longer trying to maintain her composure. "He wrote that letter 6 months before he died," she said. "He carried it with him everywhere, but he never had the courage to send it." "Catherine," I said gently, "it's not too late for you." She looked at me with surprise and hope and fear all mixed together. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you want to know me, to be part of my life, the door is open. It always has been. Even after how we treated you? Especially after how you treated me. Because I know what it's like to carry regret, to live with the weight of missed opportunities. And I know that forgiveness isn't something you earn, it's something you choose to give." Catherine started small. A phone call every few weeks, asking about the foundation, about Marcus, about Sarah. Tentative conversations that slowly grew longer, more personal, more real. She began volunteering at the foundation, working with some of our older residents on life skills and interview preparation. She was awkward at first, unsure how to connect with kids who'd lived lives so different from her own, but she was patient and determined. "Why do you do this?" one of the residents asked her during a mock interview session. Catherine thought for a moment. "Because I made some terrible mistakes when I was younger, and I'm trying to figure out how to live with them. Helping you succeed. It doesn't erase what I did, but it makes me feel like maybe I can still do some good in the world." 6 months after Robert's death, Catherine asked if she could attend Marcus's birthday party. It was going to be a small gathering, just family, and she wasn't sure if she qualified. "Of course you qualify," Sarah had said when I asked her opinion. "She's your mother. Biology doesn't make someone family, but it doesn't disqualify them either. What matters is whether she's choosing to act like family now." The party was at our house, the same house where Marcus had grown up, where we'd celebrated countless birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays that had somehow become precious memories. Catherine arrived with a gift, a framed photograph of Marcus from his first television appearance, signed by the entire cast of his show. She'd somehow tracked down everyone who'd worked with him and gotten them all to sign it. "I wanted to give you something that showed how proud I am of who you've become," she told Marcus. "Not just the famous actor, but the man who uses his success to help others. The man who loves his father so fiercely that he'll defend him against anyone, including strangers who should have known better. Marcus hugged her, and for the first time in 3 years, Catherine smiled without reservation. It's been 5 years now since that first disastrous meeting in the mansion. The David Matthews Foundation has expanded to 6 locations across 3 states, and we've helped over 500 young adults transition from foster care to independent living. Catherine sold the mansion and moved into a smaller house closer to town, closer to the foundation offices, closer to the life she should have chosen 50 years ago. She's become one of our most dedicated volunteers and one of my closest friends. She still carries guilt about the lost years, the missed opportunities, the cruel words that can never be taken back. But she's learned that regret can be transformed into purpose, that past mistakes can become present motivations. I can't give you back your childhood, she told me once as we were reviewing scholarship applications. I can't undo the pain we caused or the years we wasted. But I can choose to be the mother you needed, even if it's 50 years too late. Marcus, now 33 and still acting but also deeply involved in the foundation, has started calling her Grandma Catherine. Sarah includes her in holiday dinners and birthday celebrations and the ordinary moments that make up a family life. And me? I've learned that the hole left by unwanted childhood wasn't meant to be filled by the people who created it. It was meant to be filled by the life I chose to build, the family I chose to create, the love I chose to give and receive. Robert was right about one thing: I was a complication. I complicated their perfect plan, their pristine life, their carefully constructed image. But complications, I've discovered, are where real life happens. In the mess and the struggle and the imperfect love of people who choose each other over and over again. The scared foster kid who spent 50 years looking for his birth parents finally found them. But more importantly, he found himself, not in their rejection, but in his response to it. Not in their initial cruelty, but in their eventual courage to change. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some have better than happy endings, they have real ones. And real, I've learned, is always worth more than perfect. Last week, I got a call from Jake Sullivan, the nervous young man who'd thanked me for giving him hope 3 years ago. He's now a successful programmer, married to a teacher he met at a community college study group, and they're expecting their first child. Mr. Matthews, he said, his voice warm with contentment, I wanted you to be the first to know. We're naming the baby David. David James Sullivan. After the man who taught me that family is about choosing to love someone, not just sharing their DNA. I hung up the phone and sat in my office, surrounded by the photos and letters and thank you cards from hundreds of kids who'd found their way through our doors. Outside my window, I could see some of our current residents heading off to jobs and classes and the ordinary activities of people building lives worth living. Catherine knocked on my door frame. Everything okay? I told her about Jake's call, about the baby who would carry my name into the next generation, not because of any biological connection, but because of the choice to love someone back to life. You know, she said quietly, Robert would have been so proud. Not of the money or the recognition or any of that. He would have been proud that his son became the kind of man who saves people. His son. After 5 years, she still sometimes slips and calls me that, and I no longer correct her. Because in the end, that's exactly what I am, Robert and Catherine's son, Marcus's father, Sarah's husband, and the chosen family member of hundreds of kids who needed someone to believe in them. I am all of these things and none of them diminish the others. I was unwanted for 50 years, but I spent those years learning how to want others, how to choose love over safety, family over convenience, messy and complicated over pristine and perfect. And now, sitting in an office filled with the evidence of lives changed and families built and love chosen over and over again, I finally understand the truth that took me half a century to learn. The people who threw me away gave me the greatest gift they possibly could have. They taught me to never throw anyone else away. Some lessons are worth 50 years of waiting. Some stories are worth the pain it takes to get to the ending. And sometimes, the people who hurt you the most end up giving you exactly what you need to become who you're meant to be. Even if they never meant to do it. Even if it takes half a lifetime to understand why. Even if the gift looks nothing like what you thought you wanted. Sometimes, especially then. But life, as I've learned, has a way of throwing curveballs even when you think you've got everything figured out. 2 months after Jake's call about naming his son after me, I was sitting in my office reviewing applications when my assistant buzzed in with an urgency I rarely heard in her voice. David, you need to turn on channel 7. Now. I grabbed the remote and flicked on the small television in my office. The noon news was running a breaking story, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw the headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Local celebrity Marcus Matthews hospitalized after serious car accident. The reporter was standing outside Metro General Hospital, speaking in that carefully modulated tone they use for tragic news. The accident occurred around 10:30 this morning on Interstate 95. Matthews was reportedly driving alone when his vehicle hydroplaned on the wet pavement and struck a barrier. He was rushed here to Metro General in critical condition. My phone was already ringing before the segment ended. Sarah's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I'm already at the hospital. He's in surgery. David, you need to get here now. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. Don't remember parking or running through the emergency room doors or asking for directions to the surgical floor. The next clear memory I have is sitting in a sterile waiting room that smelled like disinfectant and fear, holding Sarah's hand while she cried quietly into my shoulder. He was coming back from that charity event in Boston, she whispered. The one for the children's literacy program. He called me around 10, said he'd be home by lunch. He was happy, David. He was talking about maybe expanding the foundation to include reading programs. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son, the son I'd chosen, who'd chosen me back, was fighting for his life after spending his morning helping other people's children, while my biological parents had spent 50 years avoiding any responsibility for the child they'd created. We sat there for 6 hours. Catherine arrived around 3 o'clock, her face pale and drawn. She didn't say anything, just sat down next to us and waited. The three of us, Marcus's father, stepmother, and grandmother, united by fear and love and the terrible helplessness of watching someone you care about struggle between life and death. Dr. Rodriguez finally emerged from surgery just after 6 in the evening, still wearing scrubs and looking exhausted. He's stable, she said, and I felt Sarah's entire body sag with relief. But it's going to be a long recovery. Multiple fractures, internal injuries, significant trauma to his spinal cord. We've done what we can, but the next 48 hours will be critical. Can we see him? Sarah asked. He's unconscious and will be for a while. But yes, you can see him. Just prepare yourselves. He doesn't look like the Marcus you know right now. She was right. The man lying in the hospital bed was barely recognizable as the confident, charismatic actor who defended me so fiercely in his grandparents' sitting room. He was connected to more machines than I could count, his face swollen and discolored, his body still and fragile under the white hospital sheets. Sarah took his hand carefully, mindful of the fourth lines. Hey, baby, she whispered. We're here. Your dad and I are here, and we're not going anywhere. I stood at the foot of his bed, looking at this young man who'd changed my life so completely, and felt something inside me break. Not the clean break of disappointment or rejection, but the messy, jagged break of love threatened. He's going to be okay, Catherine said quietly from behind me. He has to be. He's too important to too many people. That's not how it works, I said, my voice hoarser than I'd expected. Good people die every day. Important people. People who matter. But not this time, she said firmly. This time, the good guy gets to stay. Marcus was unconscious for 4 days. During that time, the waiting room became a kind of informal headquarters for everyone whose life he'd touched. His castmates came by in shifts. Representatives from various charities he supported stopped in. Kids from the foundation, current and former residents, showed up with flowers and cards and stories about how he'd remembered their names, asked about their goals, made them feel seen. It was humbling to realize how many people my son had impacted, how wide his circle of care extended beyond our little family. On the third day, a young woman I didn't recognize approached me in the cafeteria. She was maybe 25, professionally dressed, carrying herself with the kind of confidence that comes from hard-won success. Mr. Matthews? I'm Jessica Torres. I was wondering if I could talk to you for a minute. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. Of course. I lived at your Pine Street facility about 4 years ago, she said, and I began to place her. Jessica, quiet, studious, working toward a degree in social work. I graduated from college last year and I've been working at the Department of Children and Family Services. I specialize in helping kids age out of foster care. That's wonderful, Jessica. I'm proud of you. The thing is, she continued, I almost didn't make it. My senior year of college, I was struggling. Academically, financially, emotionally. I was ready to drop out, maybe move back in with an ex-boyfriend who wasn't good for me, just to have somewhere to go. She paused, collecting herself. Marcus found out somehow. I don't know how, maybe from one of the counselors at the foundation. But he showed up at my apartment one night with groceries and textbooks and this speech about how I was too smart and too important to give up on myself. I felt my throat tighten. He didn't just give me money, though he did help with tuition. He gave me something more important, he gave me perspective. He told me that his dad, you, had taught him that success isn't about avoiding failure, it's about what you do when failure seems inevitable. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes intense. He said you told him that sometimes the most important choice you can make is to keep going when you can't see any reason to keep going. That faith isn't believing things will work out, it's deciding to work towards something better even when you can't guarantee the outcome. That sounds like something I might have said, I admitted. Probably during one of his teenage crises. Well, it changed my life. And now I get to use that lesson every day, working with kids who are exactly where I was. Kids who need someone to believe in them when they can't believe in themselves. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. I wanted you to know that if Marcus doesn't She swallowed hard. If the worst happens, his impact isn't going to disappear. There are hundreds of us out here, people he touched, people he inspired, people he saved. We're going to keep doing the work. We're going to keep being the kind of people he believed we could be. After she left, I sat in the cafeteria for a long time, thinking about legacy and impact and the way love ripples outward in directions you never expect. Marcus woke up on the fourth day, groggy and confused but undeniably alive. The first word out of his mouth was Dad, which made Sarah laugh and cry simultaneously. I'm here, I said, moving closer to his bed. We're all here. He tried to sit up and immediately winced. How long was I out? 4 days. You gave us quite a scare. The other driver? There was no other driver, Sarah said gently. You hydroplaned. It was an accident. I watched him process this information, saw him mentally cataloging his injuries, assessing the damage. Even barely conscious, he was thinking like the problem solver I'd raised him to be. How bad? He asked. Dr. Rodriguez, who'd appeared as soon as the nurses called to say he was awake, pulled up a chair. You're alive, which is the most important thing. But you've got a long road ahead of you. Multiple fractures that are healing well, but there was significant trauma to your spinal cord. We won't know the full extent of the impact until the swelling goes down, but you need to prepare for the possibility of permanent mobility issues. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at me with that same expression he'd worn as a 7-year-old when he'd asked if his mother's death was his fault somehow. Dad, I don't know how to be someone who can't. Who might not be able to. Hey, I said, cutting him off. Remember what we used to say when you were little and something seemed impossible? A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. We don't have to figure out forever today. We just have to figure out today. That's right. And today, you're alive. Today, you're here with people who love you. Today is enough to work with. The recovery was brutal. 3 more surgeries, months of physical therapy, the slow and sometimes heartbreaking process of relearning basic tasks. Marcus did regain most of his mobility, though he'd always walk with a slight limp and tire more easily than before. But something unexpected happened during those long months of recovery. Marcus discovered that he loved teaching, sharing what he'd learned about acting, about resilience, about turning setbacks into comebacks. He started working with young people in the Foundation's drama therapy program, helping them use performance as a way to explore and express their experiences. It's weird, he told me one afternoon as we watched a group of teenagers rehearse a scene they'd written about aging out of foster care. I spent so many years focused on my own career, my own success. But this feels more important somehow. More real. Maybe because it is. You know what's funny? I keep thinking about that day at Robert and Catherine's house. How angry I was that they couldn't see your value. But now I'm wondering if I was really seeing it either. I looked at him curiously. I saw you as my dad, obviously. But I don't think I truly understood what it meant that you'd chosen to love me, chosen to raise me, chosen to make me part of your family. I took it for granted because it was just what you did. But watching these kids, seeing how rare the kind of unconditional love actually is, it makes me realize how extraordinary you are. Marcus, let me finish. I've been thinking about this a lot, lying in that hospital bed. About choices and families and what really matters. You could have walked away when my mom died. You had no legal obligation to me, no biological connection. But you didn't walk away. You chose me, over and over again, for 21 years. He gestured toward the teenagers, who were now improvising a scene about job interviews. That's what we're trying to do here, right? Show these kids that someone chooses them. That they matter to someone. That they're worth fighting for. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Then this accident, this recovery, all of it, maybe it was worth it. Maybe I needed to lose some things to understand what I actually had. 6 months after the accident, we held the Foundation's annual fundraising gala. Marcus insisted on attending, though he tired easily and needed to use a cane for stability. The event raised more money than we'd ever brought in before, partly because of the media attention from his accident, but mostly because people could see the genuine impact of the work we were doing. During his speech, Marcus did something I wasn't expecting. He called me up on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying easily across the crowded ballroom, I want to introduce you to the most important person in this room. This is my father, David Matthews. The applause was generous, but he held up his hand for quiet. Most of you know the story of how this foundation started. How my dad spent 50 years looking for his birth parents, how they rejected him, how that rejection somehow led to this work we're doing now. It's a good story, triumph over adversity, love conquering abandonment, all those themes we love to hear. He paused, looking directly at me. But I want to tell you a different story. I want to tell you about the day my mother died in a car accident, and a man who had no obligation to me whatsoever looked at a 7-year-old boy and said, "You are mine now. We're family." I want to tell you about the man who worked 2 jobs so I could take acting classes, who stayed up all night when I had nightmares, who taught me that character matters more than success and that love is something you do, not something you feel. The room was completely silent now. My father spent 50 years looking for people who would claim him. But what he didn't realize is that he'd already claimed someone else. He'd claimed me. And in doing that, he showed me what it looks like to choose family, to choose love, to choose someone else's well-being over your own convenience. Marcus's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Every kid we help through this foundation benefits from that lesson. Every young adult who finds stability and support and hope here is receiving the gift my father gave me, the knowledge that someone chooses them, that someone believes they're worth the investment. He turned to face me fully. Dad, you spent 50 years feeling unwanted. But you were never unwanted. You were wanted by me, by Sarah, by Catherine, by hundreds of kids whose lives you've changed. You were wanted by people who mattered, people who saw your value, people who were smart enough to choose you back. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. But what I'll remember forever is the moment right after, when Marcus hugged me and whispered, "Thanks for choosing me first, Dad. Thanks for showing me how it's done." That night, as Sarah and I cleaned up after the gala, Catherine helped stack chairs and collect abandoned programs. At 73, she moved more slowly than she used to, but she was still one of our most dedicated volunteers. "You know," she said as we worked, "Robert would have loved tonight. He would have been so proud of Marcus's speech, so proud of everything you've accomplished." "I think he would have been proud of you too," I said. "For the choice you made to be part of this family." Catherine smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I made that choice 50 years too late." "Maybe. Or maybe you made it exactly when you were supposed to. Maybe we all had to go through everything we went through to end up here, doing this work, helping these kids." She considered this. "You really believe that? That all the pain and mistakes and lost time served some purpose?" I looked around the ballroom, thinking about Jake Sullivan and his son who would carry my name, about Jessica Torres working with foster kids, about Marcus teaching drama therapy to teenagers who'd never had anyone believe in their potential. "I believe that love finds a way," I said finally. "Even when it has to take the long route. Even when it has to survive rejection and abandonment and years of not knowing where it belongs. Love finds a way to matter." Catherine nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm grateful," she said quietly. "For the chance to be part of this, even if I came to it so late. For the chance to know the remarkable man my son became, despite everything Robert and I failed to give him." "You're giving it now," Sarah said, joining our conversation as she folded the last tablecloth. "Every day, you're giving it now. And that matters just as much as anything you missed before." We finished cleaning in comfortable silence, 3 people who'd found each other through loss and pain and the stubborn refusal to give up on love, even when love seemed determined to break our hearts. As we walked out of the hotel together, I realized that this was what family actually looked like, not the perfect scenarios we imagine, but the imperfect people who show up anyway, who choose each other repeatedly, who turn their regrets into purpose and their pain into service. The scared foster kid who'd spent 50 years looking for his birth parents had finally found them. But more importantly, he'd found himself, not in their initial rejection, but in his response to it. Not in their perfect love, but in the imperfect love he'd learned to build with people who chose him back. And in the end, that was worth everything. Even the 50 years it took to learn it. Even the pain it took to understand it. Even the mistakes it took to finally get it right. Some gifts take a lifetime to unwrap. Some families take decades to assemble. Some love stories start with rejection and end with a room full of people whose lives have been changed by someone who refused to let being unwanted stop him from wanting others. Sometimes, that's the most beautiful kind of love story there is.